Come through. Welcome to the MBA and Executive Education Masterclass series, where we talk to industry leaders and top academics about what's current in the field today. Today we have Nick Carter, a partner at Brannigans, but also MBA Advisory Board member. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nick Carter. I am, as you said, one of the partners at Brannigans. We're a multidisciplinary HR consultancy firm with offices in Queenstown, Christchurch, Nelson and now Wellington. Broad remit of HR services, including executive and board appointments, HR consultancy, as well as executive leasing contracting.
And why we're talking today is because you have a front row seat on the skills, challenge and opportunities within New Zealand. And I'd love to hear your take on current trends that you're seeing out there at the moment.
Yeah, certainly very much a dynamic market at the moment. In terms of some trends we're seeing, southern drift to Canterbury in particular. Obviously Queenstown has also grown as well, but we are seeing people relocating out of the larger cities in the North Island, such as Auckland, and that has got a dramatic impact in terms of the population growth that you are seeing in the regions at the moment. Often we're seeing this being underpinned by people being able to relocate while still remaining working for their companies, and a lot of that is more agile workforce and also agile work environments, as well as allowing that change. Also too, we are seeing the emergence of new roles being created off the back of digital transformation and advent of new technology. Obviously things like carbon accounting was one skill set we saw come through the other week. It's the first time we've seen that, but the ESG piece is really starting to come to the fore. We also believe the Māori economy is starting to emerge as a growing sector, and they believe it's going to be a significant part of the economy by 2050, if not significant already. Also too, we're seeing people who are working in the big data space. We are actively seeing a lot more people wanting to make sense of big data sets coming off things such as AI, and that's certainly a trend that we're seeing as well in terms of varying skill sets that are required. And I guess translating that data set that's coming off AI and other technology tools, and how to put that into a business context that they can actually make informed decisions that they can capitalise on.
Do you see, because you have a global and a local perspective, do you see any kind of New Zealand-centric trends that's very particular to us, or vice versa? How's this translating into global trends?
Obviously, Māori economy is an indigenous economy in a more broader global context. That is certainly a New Zealand-centric, Aotearoa-centric trend we're seeing. I think as a country, obviously, we're not perfect, but we certainly are probably a lot further ahead than, say, other countries. Our Western Island is a great example of that. So I think that is quite a specific trend we're seeing. Te Ao Māori viewpoint incorporated into a more corporate world is in New Zealand, as a New Zealand context. But I think we do mirror, sometimes we lead, sometimes we lag, but we do mirror global trends in terms of roles coming through. I think COVID also has probably been a great equaliser. We're probably a lag economy in terms of digitisation, working from home, working remotely, but I believe COVID has now brought us probably in step with the rest of the world in terms of remote working.
And yet we're quite far away, right? So we're seeing both the skill shortage need in the market at the moment, massive skills shortages, but at the same time a bit of a fiscal crunch. Can you talk about that dichotomy a bit and how leaders are managing that?
Yeah, look, obviously our unemployment rate is actually lifting up at the moment. So it is sector specific in terms of skill shortages. Probably a year or two ago it was across the board, pretty much everybody was screaming for people. It is now more sector specific at the moment. You're seeing some sectors booming. Tourism's a great example of that, where there is genuine demand. Even at a regional level, centres like Queenstown, where we have an office, they are screaming out for staff, but they've got an issue around accommodation. They genuinely don't have enough accommodation to house the workforce that they need to take advantage of the upswing in incoming tourism. Then primary sector is an example. They've got technology coming into play. A great company like Halter is virtual fencing and also helping pasture management. That's a great example of technology in a more traditional sector that is disrupting their workforce because they obviously potentially need less less labour to manage stock is a great example. I believe from a trend perspective, the leadership capability, obviously as more people are working remotely, I think the leadership skill sets are required to do that are probably having to lift. So I'm seeing a trend of companies really investing in their people at the moment, in particular lifting the capability of their leadership, which ties nicely into the MBA obviously. Yeah. But I do believe that the expectations on the leadership in the modern work environment at the moment, but also the capability gap, that is a trend we're seeing and people having to invest in that. It is a lot harder to manage workforce that are more dispersed or working from home. You have to be a lot more deliberate as a leader and you have to embrace tools that are available to help manage a remote workforce. So that is a trend we're seeing as well.
That's really interesting, and I suppose that was my question, is why all of a sudden this gap in leadership? We know that leadership development has always been a need, but we're certainly seeing this massive uptrend in people just needing capability. And like you said, it's this new context. But is there anything else that's potentially driving this real need for leadership upskilling at the moment? Yeah,
I think a trend we often see, and you've seen it, it's not a new thing, it's something that's happened over decades, is often a technical expert is promoted into a leadership role because they're technically really strong. The excellent sales rep, as an example, they assume he or she makes a great sales manager, and that's obviously not the case at all. Often, I think, around organisational design and remuneration, there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of how you reward people. In a traditional model, you pay people more if they're a leader in the business or manage staff. We are seeing a trend globally and domestically as well, where people are starting to reward people for their capability or the role they play in the business, not attached to how many people they lead. So it allows pathways for technical leaders to thrive, get paid for what they're worth, while people who are, potentially have greater interest or more capability to lead people to also thrive. So they're sort of dual pathways rather than the more traditional hierarchy of if you lead a team, you get paid more. So that is a trend we're seeing.
And is that coupled with, I suppose, more non-traditional organisational structures that you're seeing in organisations, just structuring differently for remote work situations and
I think from a remote workforce perspective, it's an interesting debate because I sat with a very senior CEO of a large infrastructure company here in New Zealand, and they said, we don't allow working from home. I was quite surprised. I thought the person was very progressive. And this individual said, look, we've got a mix of white-collar or office-bound workforce and blue-collar or traditional blue-collar who have to be on the tools essentially. The challenge they had is why do we allow often our best paid people to work remotely and our blue-collar workforce who are potentially paid slightly less to not be able to work remotely. So they made a blanket rule, no one can work from home.
Wow.
Simply because if one can't
Equity.
do it. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So I think that's an interesting debate. So that's a more traditional business. That said, I've got clients who have pioneered, they're in an engineering consultancy here in Canterbury, they've pioneered the 9-day work fortnight and they've done it for 7 or 8 years very successfully.
Yeah.
Interesting, when I talked to those leaders, I said, how does it work? They've done it way before it was a thing.
Yeah.
And he said, it's fantastic for our staff. It's not so good for the directors because they do have to lift up and they also have to plug the gaps for their workforce. So I think it's not just an agile workforce that can work remotely or a more technology-based, it can be a more traditional business, but I think it has to be fit for purpose, but also take into account what's the expectations of your clients. It's a horses for courses scenario, you can't just take a one-size-fits-all approach.
And I think, and you've alluded to this, then that creates pressure in the middle, and it's those middle managers who feel the squeeze because they're essentially having to deal with very unique situations and come up with the solutions themselves. But we're also seeing with developments in AI and technology that it's also those middle management roles that are targeted and being displaced in some way. So middle managers are having a tough time of it, aren't they?
Yeah, I think potentially absolutely correct. They are being pinched at both ends. The expectations of their people they lead is probably higher than it's ever been. And also from a senior leadership perspective, expectations on them has probably never been higher as well. And they are potentially the most at risk from a technology disruption as well. So I think it's about remaining agile, constant upskilling, but also what you measure. More companies are moving to output measurements as opposed to inputs. It's that clock in, clock out. people, I think that it's really critical you do measure the outputs of an organisation or an individual rather than just pure inputs, which is a more traditional model. And I think AI and other technology tools are really helping measure outputs. So as soon as you start to measure outputs as opposed to inputs, the ability to be more flexible in terms of hours worked, but also bringing different people into the workforce, school age children, which I've got. It's problematic. I had to do the drop off this morning. It allows me to drop in a bit later, but I can work from home in the morning, as an example. So I think it is challenging, but I think often those middle managers are the ones that are highly skilled technical experts who've been promoted up. So how do you redeploy those skill sets if they are being disrupted from a leadership perspective in terms of the workforce?
About those outputs, so I don't know if Brannigans helps with that, but just that whole thing around writing somebody's position description and what they'll be expected to do and how that really is just a point in time. And we know that good people often go beyond that, or the job itself just morphs. So how do we go about dealing with that strategically as leaders around our people management component and making sure that we're getting the most out of our employees while not burning them out, but also just making sure that it's aligned with outputs and rewards and our strategy as a whole?
Absolutely, great question. I guess there's a few parts to that. A position description is a legal document, so you have to have that as part of an individual employment agreement. Mm-hmm. But also has to be flexibility in terms of how a person redefines what their role is. From our perspective, a position description obviously has to describe the key inputs, but also ensure there's output measurements attached to that. Not to be confused with an annual KPI setting, which I think has to complement the position description as well. It's interesting, we use AI now for creating position descriptions in our workforce for our clients. Mm-hmm. It still takes really good quality input from our consultants, but we use AI to help create it. Mm-hmm. That's reducing time spent, but it's also getting better outcomes in terms of the quality information we're providing our clients. But I do think good measurements of inputs in terms of behaviours that we expect around the role, but also having some good quality measurements in terms of how you actually measure success around the inputs that you want them to do.
Yeah, what does success actually look like?
Exactly.
So to finish this off, can you give us just a little bit of a picture around best practice? Tell us a story about a company, you don't have to name them, that does this really, really well and harnesses their people as a strategic asset.
Yeah, look, I think probably that engineering consultancy that I was referring to, they're a very progressive, mid-sized consultancy firm, but my understanding, they went to their staff, sort of what's an incentive that would actually attract you to come to work for us. It's a very cluttered market. Structural engineers are highly skilled, obviously, high in demand. How do you create an environment that will actually attract people from, say, a much bigger firm? So they talk to their people and really understood what would spin their wheels. And I think that's a critical piece. You actually need to talk to your people, have good communication, understand what great looks like from their perspective, and that 9-day fortnight was created. In terms of using technology, our business at the moment, I'd never profess to be best in field, but we do spend a lot of time investing in what the future might look like. So we are actively using AI tools to help provide better services to our clients. Position description writing is a great example of that. We're currently utilising AI tools for our interviews. We obviously still do our interviews for our clients. It's a critical part of our process, but we're using AI tools to actually record and actually put into report headings for us, and actually add value through the process by incorporating that into our recruitment processes. What it does is allow us to focus on the interview as opposed to taking notes. So we're focused on, as we are sitting here together today, we can focus on the body language, we can focus on what the actual answers are rather than taking notes. Those are probably two good examples, I think, on how people are using innovative thinking around people solutions.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you so much for coming today. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you part of the program. A great contributor to UC in general, but just also a great contributor to the local community.
Thank you.